Hi, and welcome back to History 6 at RPS, the medieval Mediterranean world, with your amazing host, Mr. Mitchell. Today, the crisis of the 3rd century. In our last few episodes, we learned that the Julio-Claudians had brought together the empire and the powers of the emperor. The Flavians expanded Rome's power and saw it through some difficult times. And the Antonines had brought peace and prosperity. We can probably safely say that the Romans did indeed have this empire thing figured out. But this was all about to change. After Marcus Aurelius died, the Roman Empire began to gradually fall apart. His son Commodus ran the empire poorly, and a series of military leaders left the empire close to ruin. In this video, you will learn how the Roman Empire survived the 3rd century and how one man thought he knew what to do to help the Roman Empire continue. His attempt to fix the problem actually made things worse. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, he handed down control of the empire to his son. This is him, Commodus. The Antonine dynasty, which was known for its prosperity, was governed by emperors who were hand-picked. Marcus Aurelius, however, chose his own son Commodus, and he was a terrible leader who really wasn't that interested in ruling the Roman Empire. He did love gladiatorial fights, and the people loved him because he often paid for huge amounts of fights and sometimes even participated in the gladiatorial fights. He also believed that he was Hercules. He eventually was killed by his wrestling partner, who was paid to murder him by some senators who thought he needed to be removed from office. After a brief civil war, Septimius Severus, a general, won in 193 and began what is called the Severan dynasty, which would last until 235 when things took a major turn for the worse. The 42 years of Severan rule were marked by family disputes, constant political troubles, and money issues. All of the rulers were professional soldiers rather than wealthy scholars or philosophers like some of the Antonites. The Senate, which had so generously been given power by Augustus in exchange for a title, emperor, right? Augustus was emperor. The Senate was now almost powerless. Generals and armies fought all the time, both with their enemies and with themselves. Every single emperor was proclaimed Augustus by the troops that he led. The military was the real holder of power. And when the last Severan, Alexander Severus, was murdered in 235, it led to what is called the crisis of the 3rd century. During the next 50 years, the Roman Empire nearly collapsed. It was a time of invasion, constant civil war, plague, economic depression. Almost all the leaders were military generals, and there were like 20 to 25 emperors called the barracks emperors during this time. Most lasted less than 3 years, and some much less than that. Only one emperor during this entire period died of natural causes. It was a time of such great change that nearly everything that made the Romans Roman had changed, including their religion. Roman army fought Roman army for control and began to neglect their duties, mainly being to stop the invasions of foreigners. The province were frequently attacked along the Rhine and Danube rivers, right here. Let's get that pen working. Right, the Rhine and Danube rivers right here, right? You can see all the invasions that are taking place right there. And there was also all these invasions going on over here in the east. In 258, the empire was split into 3 separate states. And by 274, the empire had been reunited and troops were back in place. But because of the neglect of duties, many cities, especially in the west, were ruined and could not be rebuilt. Many cities that had not used walls for protection before now found themselves building them. Even Rome. Even though troops were restored and the external threat had been stopped, there were plenty of internal problems that needed to be dealt with. There was still no standard way to determine the next emperor, leading to continuous civil war. Everyone picked their favorite candidate, and the size of the empire made it nearly impossible for just one person to rule. The issues facing the west near Rome were completely different from those in the east. And most faced east because that part of the empire was still pretty strong and wealthy. Better that the empire continue in half rather than fall completely. One man had a plan that would allow Rome to continue. In the west, it would last another 200 years, and in the east, another 1,000. Diocletian's solution was as simple as it was elegant. There would simply be 2 Augustuses, one for the east and one for the west, and each would choose his successor, who he would call his Caesar. After the break, we learn about some of the barracks emperors and their incredible demise. Today's episode is brought to you by the good people who work in the Forum Romanum. The Forum Romanum is your one-stop shop for all your needs, from kitchenwares to produce, from legal advice to religious worship, from fresh, hot food to school children learning lessons. You can do it all at the Forum Romanum. Meet all your friends and spend some time seeing others and being seen. And the Forum Romanum is just steps from the Colosseum at the base of the Palatine Hill. The Forum Romanum. See you there! So, at one point, there were 14 emperors in just 33 years. Some of the stories are insane. Maximinus Thrax, who was the first of the barracks emperors, was murdered by his own troops. Gordian, who succeeded him, killed himself after losing a battle. Several were killed by the Praetorian Guards, who were supposedly the emperor's personal bodyguards. Many died in battle against rival quote-unquote emperors, while several others were killed by their own troops on purpose or on accident. 2 generals, Valerian here and Gallienus, ruled together for 7 years, but, of course, Valerian was captured in battle and died in captivity in Persia. It was quite an unstable time, as you can see, and someone actually has made a board game called the Barracks Emperors, which I watched a couple videos. It looks like it's pretty interesting. Maybe we should try and play sometime. Needless to say, someone had to right the ship. That someone was Diocletian. And in our next video, we'll learn more about his solution and maybe decide how effective it was.